Elaine Stabler, magazine editor for Alliance, and I'll be moderating today's discussion. For our audience members who are tuning in with audio only, I am a white woman with long brown hair, round purple glasses, and gold-coloured earrings. This event is hosted by Alliance, but it's coming to you in partnership with Impatience Earth, Disability Rights Fund, and Impatience Wellbeing. Joining me today is a very large panel comprising leaders in philanthropy, activism, and academia with expertise and lived experience across disability, gender, and racial justice. I will be introducing each panelist briefly in just a moment. Today, we're going to be talking about the report, Disability Rights and Climate Justice, a Funder's Guide, co-published by Impatience Earth, Disability Rights Fund, and Impatience Wellbeing, which describes how people with disabilities are more exposed to climate problems and proposes solutions for funders on how they can help. But first, before we get into it, just a few words on housekeeping. Today, we're going to run for approximately 1 hour to 1 hour 30. There will be a Q&A session, which audience members will have the chance to take part in too. It's important to note that this webinar includes 2 chat functions. The first looks like a little speech bubble, and you can find it in the bottom right hand of your screen. You can use this chat to introduce yourself if you wish, and let us know if you're having any technical or accessibility issues. My colleagues are on hand behind the scenes to help if you need it. The second chat is called Slido, and it's used for the question and answer part of this webinar. You'll also find it in the bottom right hand of your screen. You can submit a question to our panelists at any time using Slido. I'll be keeping an eye on this throughout the webinar and selecting questions to put to the panelists during the audience Q&A at the end. When you ask a question, it would be wonderful if you could tell us who you are and where you're from. We're limited by time, but we'll put as many of them as we can to our panel. Today, we also have 2 interpreters joining us, providing ISL interpretation, and you should be able to see one of them on your screen already. The interpreters will be alternating every 20 minutes, and we're also providing manual live captioning today. Click the Stream Text button on the right-hand side of your screen to open the captions. And should you wish to activate live closed captioning in a language other than English, you can do so via the CC button in the bottom left-hand side of your screen. If you cannot see the option here, please look for the 3 dots button, which should provide you with the option. If you're having issues with any of these communication methods, my colleagues are on hand to help. Please just feel free to send a message to the Alliance team in the chat window, and there's an option to make the message private if you wish. Or send a quick email to alliance@alliancemagazine.org, and we'll do our best to assist you promptly. I'll repeat that again. That's alliance@alliancemagazine.org. Lastly, I'm delighted to let you all know that today we're offering a 20% discount code to anyone who would like to subscribe to Alliance Magazine. Alliance Magazine is a compendium of news, analysis, and opinion on global philanthropy and social investment. The link will be in the chat shortly if you'd like to do so. And a recording of today's webinar will be shared with all attendees shortly after the session. Now, without further ado, welcome to my panelists who are joining me today. We have Bonface Massah, Executive Director, African Albinism Network; Hyde Townsend, Senior Advisor for Disability Inclusion, Board Foundation; Dr. Sarabajaya Kumar, Director, Impatience Wellbeing; Dwi Ariani, Acting Co-Director of Programs, Disability Rights Fund; Maria Un, HWDI, Sulawesi Selatan Himpunan Wanita Disabilitas Indonesia; and Yasmin Ahmed, CEO Impatience Earth. Now I'm going to hand over to Yasmin. I'm sorry for stumbling there at the end. There was a lot of names, but Yasmin's going to speak to you a little bit about climate justice and disability. Yasmin, please do take a moment to reintroduce yourself and your physical characteristics if you wish.
Wonderful. Thank you, Elaine. And thank you, Alliance Magazine, for hosting us today. So my name is Yasmin, and I'm the CEO of Impatience Earth, a non-profit climate philanthropy consultancy. To give a visual description of myself, I am a brown woman with shoulder-length black hair wearing a dark green jumper. And I wanted to start by giving the audience a bit of context of why Impatience Earth has partnered with Impatience Wellbeing and Disability Rights Fund on developing this guide for funders. And it really stems from us trying to address our own blind spots in this area. So Impatience Earth, since 2020, has been working with funders to help them to understand and act on the climate crisis. And we've been fortunate to have worked with lots of clients who are really passionate about resourcing communities who are the most vulnerable to climate impacts, whether at home or globally, and whether it's women, youth, Indigenous peoples, or racialized communities. But people with disabilities are an afterthought, if they are thought about at all. And I'll hold my hand up high and I'll say that this includes us at Impatience Earth as philanthropy advisors. This is in spite of the fact that there are over 1.3 billion people with visible and invisible disabilities around the world, 80% of whom are in the global south. And with the multiple military conflicts that we're witnessing on the news these days, this number is growing day by day. For those of us who have the privilege to sit in the global north, we shouldn't be dismissing this as a problem as over there. We must all remember that as we ourselves get older, we are more likely to be living in a society that disables us. In countries where life expectancy exceeds 70 years, individuals spend an average of 11% of their lifespan living with a disability. But most importantly, people with disabilities living in our own communities right now are often at the sharpest end of poverty and most likely to suffer physically and economically when storms, heat waves, and floods hit. I could give you a lot of facts about what makes people with disabilities more vulnerable to climate, and there is a whole section in the guide that will tell you about this, but we know that it's the stories that stick. So I wanted to read something that someone who registered for this webinar shared with us, and I wanted to say thank you to that individual for sharing so openly. I've shortened and I've anonymized it a bit for their privacy, but here it is. I live with autoimmune disorders. Heat and sunlight trigger my symptoms so badly sometimes that I need intensive steroid treatment that can last a month to calm the body. These past 2 summers have been debilitating for me. Symptom flare-ups, staying indoors in AC, deep fatigue. As you can deduce, all of this keeps me isolated as well as sick. Depression and anxiety slam me. Friends and family drift away when I cannot be present for months at a time. Global warming and environmental injustice are crushing this once vibrant person and lover of all things outdoors. I live in financial fear of the 23-year-old air conditioning unit breaking down. Where will that money come from that I require to stay alive? I am on full disability benefits and I'm not permitted to earn even a penny, or I will lose my public retirement benefit. So this is a story coming from one of the theoretically richest nations on the planet. So we aren't even talking about just people with disabilities living in countries where climate adaptation financing isn't reaching. And this is why we want disability firmly on the radar of climate funders and vice versa to put climate on the radar of disability rights funders. And we also wanted to highlight the fact that people with disabilities are not just powerless victims in this picture. As the guide shows, and this webinar will help illustrate, they are often at the forefront of solutions in their communities. And I wanted to end with a few acknowledgements before handing it back over to Elaine. Firstly, I wanted to thank the Climate Justice Just Transition Collaborative for giving us funding and space to hold our first discussion on climate justice and disability rights during their webinar series a couple of years ago. And it was that first webinar that sparked the idea for this practical guide. Secondly, a big thank you to all the people who contributed to the research. This included the 200 or so people who responded to our survey, the 30 organizations of people with disabilities that took part in focus group discussions, all the funders who agreed to be interviewed, and the 5 organizations who validated the final report. And finally, a massive shout out to our lead consultant, Faith Lemon. She did all the hard work of pulling all of this research together and synthesizing it into an easy to follow guide for funders. So we hope that it will spur some much needed introspection within the funder community, but also, and more importantly, action on ensuring that people with disabilities are no longer an afterthought. So thank you very much, and I'll hand it back to you, Elaine.
Thank you, Yasmin. Before I hand over to our next speakers, I just wanted to let everyone know that the Slido chat has been disabled so that we can prioritize the live captioning, which is coming to you via stream. So if you have a question for our panelists, you can put it in the normal chat. So that's just the normal chat box. I'll be monitoring this one throughout, and we can put our questions to the panelists at the end. But now I'm going to hand over to Dwi and Sarah Bajaya to speak a little bit more in depth about the report. Dwi, you're up first. Please do take a moment to reintroduce yourself and share a few words on your physical characteristics if you wish.
Thank you, Elaine. Hi, everyone. My name is Dwi Aryani. I'm based in Indonesia. I'm working as acting co-program director for Disability Red Funds. I'm woman with disability, a wheelchair user, and I'm Asian woman wearing hijab and glasses. And I would like to share with you all about the funding or the part of the report that share about the obstacle that organization of person with disability share in how they can work on the intersectionality between disability and climate change. So over 19% of the OPD and NGO and NGO respondent indicate that they are working at the intersection between climate change and disability, but only 30% of the collective work is funded. There is a lot of obstacles that highlight in the report. One of them is limited funding opportunity to funding the work on climate justice and disability. And there is still a collaborative missing between a partnership between OPD and environmental organization to foster knowledge exchange and joint initiative. There's also highlight the lack of capacity. Some OPD mentioned that there is still lack of OPD that have expertise on climate change. On the other side, NGO and ENGO or Organization of Environmental Justice say that they still have lack understanding of disability issue. So this lead also to there is still lack of collaborations, innovations to work together between OPD and the environmental organizations. And in some of the obstacles, I also mentioned that there is still lack of seeing organization of person with disability as partner from the environmental justice organizations. That organization of person with disability also working on the climate justice issue. There's also still lack of reliable data on the intersection of climate and disability. There are still scarce and disaggregated data remains scarce at these intersections as advocacy evidence-based to advocate on the inclusive climate actions. And there's still also a lack of participation or organization of person with disability in the decision making when it comes to climate change policy program, and the framework on this also still missing fully participation of person with disability. And stigma also still see as highlighted by Organization of Person with Disability. They mentioned that OPD still see as a beneficiary rather than a partner by organization that working on climate justice. And there is a lot of opportunity funding, but there is lack of accessibility. So the opportunity is not provided in accessible way so that organization of person with disability can access those opportunities. And OPD also still left out in the decision making on climate change. And this is also lead to the fact that there is still not much work happenings on the intersection between disability and climate change. And from the funder respondent, they mentioned that 82% support climate actions, 94% provide grant to marginalized group, particularly women and youth. But I think there is also still a lack of data whether those marginalized group that funding for example, women or youth, whether there's also including women with disability and youth with disabilities. Only 24% of the funding goes to disability inclusive climate justice. And grantmaker also still not see that disability is something that minded to their organizations. And they also think they are fear of making mistakes, and they feel still lack knowledge and expertise on disability issue. But in the report also highlight some of the opportunity that will be shared also by my colleagues. So I hand over to Elena. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dwi. Now we're going to come to you, Sarah Vijaya. Please do take a moment to reintroduce yourself and share a few words on your physical characteristics, if you wish.
Thank you so much, Elaine. So my name's Sarah Vijaya. I am a scholar and a teacher at University College London. I also direct Inpatients Wellbeing, where we focus on all issues disability. So we focus on equitable living, equitable working, and equitable representation, and have a number of projects that we're pursuing there. It's a great pleasure to be with you all today. And as my great colleague Yasmin has already said, this has come out of wonderful collaboration with everyone here. So we're very grateful. In terms of my physical characteristics, I'm a brown woman with shoulder length curly hair. I'm wearing Murano glass earrings from Italy today, and have a grey top on. I'm also registered blind, and in America I think they say legally blind, and I'm a motorised wheelchair user. And by way of sort of just a sentence of background, I have experienced a lot of exclusion from the climate justice movement myself, even though I've been an environmental activist since the 1980s. And I thought that this was therefore the time to get the communities and the funders who fund these communities working together. So in terms of the report, I'm really going to talk about sort of the opposite of what Dwi discussed. So I'm going to talk about the opportunities which are, have come out of the report in relation to what OPDs, or Organisations of People with Disabilities, or as we call them, DDPOs, Deaf and Disabled People's Organisations in Britain, and international NGOs. So these are suggestions from these groups. So the first one is to funders to please make your funding equitable, sustainable, and flexible. And the suggestion is that you can do this by conducting outreach, embracing participatory methods, ensuring inclusive application processes, and encouraging grassroots groups. The second suggestion is that you could facilitate collaboration and networking through creating platforms and opportunities for knowledge sharing. And there's a lovely case study in the report of food sovereignty for people with disabilities in Indonesia. So we don't have time to go into all the case studies during this little presentation, but I just point that out to you. The third thing is to prioritise data collection and analysis. So as funders, you can support research on climate change and disability. And there's a very nice, again, case study report in the in our report, about disability and climate change in the Pacific, with findings from Kiribati, the Solomon Islands, and Tuvalu. And I've made a note about their findings, so I'll just share that very quickly with you. That climate change is negatively impacting in all these areas: agriculture, fishing, food security, access to water and health. And they note in their report, which came out in 2021, that disasters are noted as a significant concern, as well as emerging issues which are leading to new risks. So again, I commend that report to you. Also, we'd like, or they would like, and we, as a disabled person myself, if you could promote participation, so champion leadership of disabled people. This would be great because we are underrepresented in all sectors of the economy, be it government, non-profit, or the public sector. And, you know, the more that we're included and we're voices at the table, the more we can influence policy, which actually improves things for everybody, not just disabled people. We also suggest that you fund mutual aid and community building. OPDs need funders' support as they advocate for equitable and accessible humanitarian responses to climate-driven disasters. And an example in our report is also a wonderful disability inclusive disaster get ready guidebook from Nepal. So again, another thing for you to think about in terms of disability inclusive preparedness. We'd also like our capacity built, so and others, so the building of capacity both of disability organisations but also climate organisations through the investment in training and development. There's a need for funders to recognise the expertise embedded in the disability movement and fund OPDs to train climate INGOs. Another nice example is the inclusive climate adaptation and mitigation example in Nigeria. The report respondents would also like you to fund climate work at the intersection of gender and race and disability, and specifically funding for disabled women and girls. We say is critical due to our increased risks in the climate crisis. And again, another illustration is the Feminist Coalition in Mongolia. Funder ideas include conducting intentional outreach, so that overlaps very much with the earlier suggestion, and then also collaborating with other funders to share best practice, confronting ableism, and actually recruiting disabled people. Funders also agreed trust-based approaches and participatory grant making, which was, as suggested again by OPDs and INGOs, would assist their efforts. So these are the key opportunities that I've drawn out from the report, and very much look forward to discussing with all of you later. Thank you. Back to Elaine.
Thank you so much, Sarah Bajaya and Dewey, for those excellent presentations. Audience members, if you have any questions on those presentations, please do pop your questions in the chat. I am monitoring it, so if you've got a question that's just popped into your head, please feel free to write it down and I'll make a note of it. We'll put as many as we can to our panelists at the end. But now I'm going to approach our panelists who haven't spoken yet, and I'm going to be coming to Catherine first. I have an opening question for you, which hopefully will frame your speech in a moment. In both climate action and philanthropy, people with disabilities are too often excluded or siloed into separate conversations. How can we shift from seeing disability as an add-on to recognising disability communities as essential leaders in climate justice? And what are some of the promising approaches you've seen bridge this gap effectively already? And please do take a moment to reintroduce yourself and share a few words on your physical characteristics as well.
Great, thank you, Elaine. Hi, everybody. My name is Catherine Hyde Townsend. I am a white American woman. I live with chronic pain. I'm wearing glasses and I have mid-length brown hair. And today I'm wearing a black blouse with a gold necklace. It's a pleasure to be here with my colleagues on this call. I want to share my role at Ford, which is leading our approach to disability inclusion across Ford's 11 offices around this world. So thank you, Elaine, for this question. And I think first I'd like to address kind of why disability is too often seen as an add-on approach, because I think the way that we think about the funding needs to address this reality. So I think for many people, in many people's minds, people with disabilities are separated from other communities. So you heard our previous speakers talk about this. So disabled people are not seen as being part of Indigenous communities or youth communities or gender communities. And I think that this is part of what we need to shift. And this doesn't mean that you are addressing a new community. It's really a new way of seeing the communities that you're already serving. And so I also think that too often there's a tendency to think that the disability organizations or the quote unquote disability funders can cover the disability community. And for those of you, and I see that there are many people from the disability community, you'll know that the disability funding community is extremely small, right? And part of this, again, is reflecting the exclusion of people with disabilities in communities and certainly in philanthropy. And so amongst the philanthropies that provide billions of dollars for climate funding, very few have an intentional strategy to include people with disabilities in their efforts. And I think as this report points out, that is critical, because without that, it means that disability organizations, many of whom are on the front line of climate change, don't have sufficient or sustainable resources to continue their important work. So that's a little bit about the context. I think we also need to address, though, why add-on approaches are less effective and what we see as promising, right? So when we look at the nexus of climate and disability and focus with this kind of lens approach, we tend to look at things like risk reduction and evacuation, very important, but we're also missing mitigation, budgeting. How are disability communities part of climate financing? And what about loss and damage as well, right? Let's think about the devastating financial loss that can happen if you lose access to accessible devices. Additionally, it's very problematic when we think about the disability community only as beneficiaries. So as part of vulnerable communities, for example. And that's a problem because we're disempowering a community that has an immense amount of power and creative ideas to actually fuel climate change efforts, right? At a time when I think we can all agree we need new energy, new creative ideas that can help push us to tipping points. So this leads me to the promising approaches in my work at Ford. And I'm going to deviate, I think, a little bit from what I was going to say. When I was listening to the summary of the report, I know that for somebody who's new, it can feel a little bit overwhelming. And part of my suggestion would be just to start somewhere. And interestingly, the example I wanted to give from Ford, we started with an add-on approach. We were supporting one funder who was supporting a group of mosquito divers in Honduras. So these are indigenous divers who are diving for food, and their food sources were more restricted. But over time, what we came to understand was that that work really needed more scale, it needed more partners, and there were a variety of organizations that came together, a climate justice organization, a mainstream human rights organization. And women's rights organizations and labor rights organizations. And together they're working on strategic litigation in the inter-American court system. And I think what's exciting about this is that it started as an add-on approach, but when we really got down to what would change things, it required this kind of cross-movement collaboration. And I think it's an incredibly exciting project that shows the power of bringing communities together and understanding the ways that gender injustice, disability injustice, and the injustice that Indigenous communities face can come together. So I think I'll just close by saying, we really need to learn by doing. I hope you all read this report. It's an incredible report. I don't think there is any of its kind, but we just need to get our hands dirty, as we like to say in English. People with disabilities are the ultimate hackers. Again, another phrase that we like to use in the US. And engaging on disability allows donors to put our values of inclusion, right, nothing about us without us, and leaving no one behind, into action. And at the same time, we're harnessing the resilience and power of an incredible community. So thank you so much. And I'll pass it over to Elaine before Bon shares his work. Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. I really appreciated your presentation just then, and I think learning by doing is probably one of the standout quotes we've had so far in this webinar. I couldn't agree more. We are limited on time, so I'm going to move straight on to Bon. I have a leading question for you as well. People with albinism face unique and often overlooked vulnerabilities in the face of climate change. Could you explain what these are, and how can climate policy and funding mechanisms better recognise and respond to these intersectional challenges? And please do take a moment to reintroduce yourself and share a few words on your background and physical characteristics.
Thank you very much. I am personally a person with albinism, and as you've heard, I'm the executive director of Africa Albinism Network. We are a network that supports organization of persons with albinism across Africa. And our focus is to promote rights and protection of rights of persons with albinism. I think it's an honor for us to join this panel, listening to the previous presenters, and also looking at the report. It's very clear that all of us, we have been affected by climate change positively or negatively. Based on the work that we do as Africa Albinism Network, let me start by saying for people with albinism, we have been greatly also affected by climate change. One is because of the sun. So we live in fear of dying of skin cancer, but also we live in fear as a result of disasters that are displacing majority of people, including persons with albinism. And in the context of the work that we're doing, these disasters are not only displacing us, but also we have seen in Africa where a majority of people with albinism are being killed for ritual attacks. So once we have a disaster, it also increases the risk of a majority of people with albinism, including children, being abducted or facing trafficking. So this is, I think, something that we should put in context when we talk about the long-term effect of climate change on persons with albinism. Looking at the topic today, it's quite interesting when we look at the true climate equity. What does that mean to us as persons with disabilities, to us as persons with albinism? I think we need to ask donors or funders to start looking at the various domains of rights that we all enjoy as human beings, including persons with disabilities. But also we must be very intentional when we're talking about funding around climate change interventions on the multiple vulnerabilities that we face as persons with disabilities and persons with albinism. I'll be very specific, I think, to give a few examples of what we face as persons with albinism. I mentioned around increased sun exposure that leads to skin cancer, which is killing many of us due to unavailability of places, unavailability of sunscreen, but also inaffordability of sunscreen. Secondly, is about the accountability gaps, system accountability gaps that is there. You have seen us, I think, as in doing a campaign of with against with the WHO and other partners to ensure that we have sunscreen back on the essential medical list of the WHO and including various governments. It is very important to ensure that we have sunscreen within the essential medical drugs or essential medical list, so that it can be available to majority of us, but also government can prioritize which funding can be allocated to ensure that this sunscreen is available across the globe, but also in main African context. Climate change has also affected us a lot in terms of access to education. Most of the work that we do across Africa, we still have rural schools where learners are learning under a tree, and with our skin condition, majority of us, we cannot learn well under a tree. So we're exposed to the sun, we can't see well, and all this has led to majority of persons with albinism being excluded in terms of access to education. And that has also contributed to a limitation to access to employment and business. I think from the experience that we have also seen in most African countries is the response around disasters. Most of the responses are not very inclusive on the specific needs of people with disabilities. In our case, we have really seen a lot of exclusion when it comes to specific needs of persons with albinism. And this is something that we can improve as the stakeholders, as funders, as we are funding different interventions, different programs. We can ensure that they provide specific responses or measures to different types of disability, including us as persons with albinism. Allow me, I think, to also share our experience in terms of the need for funders to invest in the organization of persons with disability. As a network, we work as an OPD, and we have seen how powerful our voice or the voice of people with albinism has been in the space of climate change. And if we ignore the voice of people with albinism, or if we ignore the deliberate effort to invest in organization of persons with disabilities, we lose out not just the voice, but also lose out issues of self-representation of persons with disabilities within the climate justice and climate action space. So I would want to encourage donors and stakeholders to ensure that yes, we should invest in capacity of organizational persons with disabilities, capacity at two levels, capacity to fund our core work as an OPD, but also capacity for us to develop and engage meaningfully with other civil society organizations, governments, funders within the climate change space. We should really move out of looking at we are just funding issues. I think we are funding interventions that are changing lives of people with albinism. We are funding interventions that are transforming policies and transforming attitudes towards persons with albinism and persons with disability. As I conclude, I also want to share a few opportunities. We have opportunities in the sense that across the globe, we have seen individual and collectively persons with disabilities standing up and speaking for themselves around the various barriers we are facing within the climate change space. So that's something that we funders can really invest in the OPDs and individuals to ensure that we sustain that positive energy, but also amplifying the voices that are there around climate change and persons with disability. I would also want to mention last around the issues of policy and the legal frameworks to ensure that when funders are providing interventions and programs, we should also ensure that legal frameworks and policies are very inclusive of specific needs of persons with albinism, so that they are not left out in the process of providing funding, budget interventions, but also calculation of programs around the around climate change. This is our opportunity, as I conclude, that we keep on the discussion going, so that we change the narrative, negative narrative and stereotypes that have been there around climate change and persons with disabilities. But also important is to ensure that we create a space and position persons with disabilities within the climate change discussed globally and locally to protect and promote rights of people with disabilities. Thank you.
Bon, thank you so much, and thank you for also sharing some real personal stories and human stories of experience. It's really illuminating. Next, I'm going to come to Maria, and then we'll move on to the audience Q&A. Maria, I have a leading question for you as well. Indigenous women with disabilities often face layered forms of discrimination that make them particularly vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. Yet they are also leading powerful community-driven solutions. How do we better understand and support the intersection of indigeneity, gender, disability, and climate in both policy and practice? And please do take a moment to reintroduce yourself and share a few words on your work, background, and personal characteristics.
Thank you, Elaine. Yeah, good evening, everyone. My name is Maria Un. I live in Makassar, Indonesia, and I am a physical disabled using a crutch. I have a brown skin and curly hair, and today I am wearing a batik blouse and hijab. I also wearing glasses. First of all, I would like to thank you to Impatience Earth and DRF for inviting me on behalf of HWDI to share about our work in South Sulawesi province in Indonesia. HWDI itself was established as an impact of the global movement for the protection and empowerment of women with disabilities who experience multiple forms of discrimination. And to achieve its vision, HWDI focuses on empowering women with disabilities, conducted advocacy, gender equality, and assistance for women and girls with disabilities who are victims of gender-based violence, especially sexual violence. As a part of empowering women with disabilities, HWDI ran programs to empowering indigenous persons with disabilities, especially women, in 6 indigenous communities in South Sulawesi, Indonesia, so that they are able to participate meaningfully in decision-making process, including in climate issues. This program, fully supported by DRF, AF since 2017. And what is the intersection between indigenous women with disabilities and climate? I think we all agree that climate change can cause problems to everyone, including persons with disabilities. However, for indigenous women with disabilities who have strong relationship with the territory, with natural resources, they are a group that is much more vulnerable to impacts caused by climate change. Indigenous areas have hilly and mountain slate surfaces, and lowlands are prone to disaster due to climate change such as flood, landslide, forest fire, and so on. And persons with disabilities are the most vulnerable group who bear a greater and heavier socioeconomic burden, especially those in the categories of children and women compared to those without disabilities. The daily lives of indigenous women with disabilities are highly dependent on natural resources. Extreme weather changes will also affect the lives of indigenous communities, especially those living in ecosystem areas that are most vulnerable to climate change, such as small islands, coastal areas, and tropical forests. And how indigenous women with disabilities disproportionately impacted by climate change. Indigenous persons with disabilities, especially women, are among the groups neglected in various forms of participation in natural resources management and various efforts to adapt to the negative impacts of climate change in environmental development schemes at all levels of government. The issue of natural resources management, especially related to climate change, with the involvement of indigenous women with disabilities, is an uninteresting and neglected issue. Indigenous women with disabilities also experience various challenges due to the adverse impact of climate change. The phenomenon of increasing temperatures, change in the frequency and intensity of extreme weather have an impact in various obstacles in carrying out their livelihood activities. Indigenous women with disabilities are not also involved or not invited in any trainings, workshop, or discussion related to climate change, including when people talking about regulation. And how are indigenous women with disabilities also at the forefront of solution? One, indigenous women with disabilities as agents of change in
Maria, you've cut out. Are you still with us? For everyone listening, I'm just going to give Maria another 2 minutes or so, see if she can come back. Feel free to use this time if you've got a burning question in your back pocket to pop the question in either the chat window or there's a Q&A window which has appeared. If you have access to either of those, feel free to put your question to the panelists in there. We're going to be coming to the audience Q&A in just a moment. Okay, I think my colleagues are going to be trying to get Maria back, but until she's back with us, we're going to move on. To all of the panelists who have spoken so far, thank you so much for your insight, the experience, everything you've shared so far. It's been truly illuminating, and I think it has set us up for a very good audience Q&A. Some people have already submitted questions, which is excellent. But if you've got one and you haven't asked it yet, please feel free to put it in the chat. I'm going to open up this audience Q&A to the whole panel. So we had one pre-submitted audience question, which I'm going to kick off with, and I'm going to put this to all panelists. How can climate philanthropy actively involve persons with disabilities, especially women and indigenous people in East Africa, not just as beneficiaries, but as co-designers and decision makers in climate resilience programs and funding mechanisms? What practical models exist or could be developed to ensure their leadership is recognised, resourced, and meaningfully integrated into climate justice strategies? So, of course, this question references Indigenous people in East Africa in particular, but so all of our panelists can have the chance to jump in. I'm going to open this up to Indigenous people from all over the world. Perhaps I'm going to come to Bon first. Bon, are you able to share some thoughts on this question?
Yeah, no, thank you for that question. I think for me, the first thing is to start looking at where we're coming from. As an organization of persons with disabilities, I think our strength has been championing gender human rights issues in terms of our right to health, education, and climate change. It hasn't been our strong side. So I would start from there in terms of our meaningful involvement. It's really, I think, the capacity issue of mentioned. Let's make sure the lived experiences of people with disabilities are well documented. And funders should really target organizational persons with disabilities to make sure that we document these experiences, but also we start building their capacity to be engaged at local level, but also at national level and at the international level. Secondly, is an issue of resources. I think we need to have a critical examination about if we don't fund or co-fund organization of persons with disability to build a strong movement, how far as funders we are promoting or multiplying the inequalities that is already there. So if we be very honest with ourselves, we may say that the limited funding is only multiplying the inequality that is there. And that is compounded by the limited capacity. And when our network started engaging in climate change, we had a very good experience working with the mainstream civil society organizations who are already working in climate change. And it was very challenging for them to understand disability and even them understand what albinism. And that's where now funders need to invest. They need to bring us in that space, one, to bring inclusion and self-representation, but also to teach mainstream players within the climate change space to understand what disability is and even understand the different impairments. For me, I think that is still missing, and that's where now we need to invest. And many involvement to ensure that we know what we are saying in terms of our advocacy messages in the climate change space, but also being present within the climate change engagement, civil society spaces, and our participation in Forbes last year was really a breaking ground opportunity for us to understand and present issues of albinism at that global level. Thank you.
Thanks, Bon. Catherine, I can see you have raised your hand, and actually I was going to come to you next. Do you have a response to Bon and to this question?
Yes, thank you. I wanted to really stress the importance of relationship building, and you can do that in any way that you want, but invite people with disabilities into your offices, into your events, into any kinds of agenda building or strategy feedback that you're doing. Engaging with people with disabilities is the #1 thing that we need to start doing, because without that, we can't get to understanding or even knowing about the amazing grant making opportunities and amazing leaders that exist in the community.
Great, thank you so much. We have many audience questions, so I'm going to move on again. And we haven't heard from Yasmin in a while, so I wonder if Yasmin wouldn't mind answering this question. This comes from audience member Remy, who says, I would love to hear more about what, from the panelist perspective, on the ask to support mutual aid, the type, how we can advocate this better within funder spaces.
Thanks, Elaine, and thanks, Remy. I'm not sure I'm actually the best place to answer this question on mutual aid, so I'd like to invite other panelists to contribute if they're able to.
Absolutely. Would any of our other panelists like to jump in?
Elaine, could you repeat the question, please? I'm having difficulty with my camera, but what about mutual aid? I wasn't quite...
Absolutely, I can repeat the question. So this comes from audience member Remy, who says, I'd love to hear more about what, from the panelist perspective, on the ask to support mutual aid, the type, and how we can advocate this better within funder spaces. So how can we advocate for mutual aid better within funder spaces?
So I suppose I would, I do think, Yasmin, you can talk about funder spaces maybe because you do discuss things with philanthropists, but I think it goes back to what Catherine was saying, that we, i.e. disabled people, need to be in the spaces to be able to advocate. So, you know, we funders do need to sort of look at their portfolios and what they are funding and not funding, and who's excluded from that, whose voices are excluded. And of course, you know, as disabled people, who lead deaf and disabled people's organisations certainly in Britain, that's what we call our OPDs. Many of our organisations are mutual aid. Many of them are what I would call kitchen table volunteer-led initiatives, very small but very powerful organisations. So the onus is not just on us leading mutual aid organisations, but absolutely on the funders to engage with us, you know. So I'm not sure, Remy, whether that's an answer to your question, but that's what we're arguing in this report, is that climate justice funders, climate funders and disability justice funders, they need to be inhabiting each other's spaces, and mutual aid organisations are very much part of the disability movement. Yasmin, I don't know if you've got something to add in terms of kind of the conversations you have with funders and philanthropists from that side.
Yeah, thanks, Harbajai, for kicking it off. Yeah, I guess I just wanted to add, because I would say that a big feature of our work this year really has been supporting funders to look beyond sort of household names and NGOs when it comes to climate action, and to really look very, very locally at who is doing what in the community to build resilience. And so we are very much kind of looking beyond this very siloed approach to thinking about climate action. You know, we've invested a lot in mitigation, it's shifted to adaptation, but how can we really think about building climate resilience? And so taking an integrated approach to it. And my colleagues with another organization, South North, have actually published an article in Alliance magazine today about the resilience continuum. So it's really taking that resilience lens. And so mutual aid is a huge part of that. If you've got strong mutual aid networks, you are building that climate resilience at a very local level. So I would say, you know, really funding locally, like really understanding communities, really enabling those communities to lead and resourcing them is key to this.
Thank you, both of you. I think that definitely answered the question. I'm going to move on again because we have many, many audience questions and we are limited by time. So this question comes from Dorothy. Most funding is in advocacy for inclusion. Can there also be funding for social protection initiatives that support persons with disabilities to ensure income security, health, and cover the disability-related costs as we mitigate, adapt to climate change? This question, I mean, if anyone would like to jump in, go ahead. Otherwise, I will select someone to respond. Okay, Catherine, I wonder if you wouldn't mind coming in again for this question.
Sure, absolutely. And, you know, the effort here that we're talking about around climate change is happening in other conversations around funding. And so certainly around the care agenda and social protection, surprisingly enough, or maybe not surprising to those of us who've worked in the disability rights field for a while, people with disabilities are really absent, and their voices and priorities too often aren't represented. So there's, I think, a similar work. And I think that, again, this shows, I think, where some of the creativity and collaboration can happen. And while I know that in this funding moment, this might seem really hard, I think this kind of collaboration across issues and communities is exactly the kinds of new approaches that we need, both for the social change that we're looking for, but also for us to use our funding resources as efficiently as possible.
Thank you so much. Fantastic answer. I have an interesting question now. This comes from Tanya, and I'm going to put this question to the panelists who represent the organisations that published the report. So we should have at least 3 of you. Tanya says, When I read the chat intros, the majority of attendees are from disability-led organisations. How does this messaging get shared with climate organisations or funders?
I can start.
Absolutely. Thank you, Yasmin.
Yes, sure. So yeah, this guide is, while we developed it with funders in mind, but we understand that it's also useful for disability organizations doing their own advocacy and trying to raise funding from climate funders. And I think in the registration list that we saw for this webinar, there were actually quite a few funders. So we hope that if they aren't here today, that they are going to watch the recording afterwards. And I think us as Impatience Earth, you know, we have a network of clients and other funders, so we do have access. So we will be disseminating this report and this webinar recording as widely as we can within those networks to really start those conversations. And, you know, in our client work going forward, I think disability will be a much more explicit thing that we will be talking about.
Thank you, Yasmin. Would any of the other panelists who represent the organisations who published the report like to add anything to Yasmin's response? Okay, if not, I'm going to go to the next audience question. Oh, Dwi, you've come in. Yes, please do share your thoughts.
Thank you, Ellen. Yes, this is Dwi from Disability Rights Funds. We also are part of some of funder network like Indigenous Funder Network or Human Rights Network. So we will also share this report to those funder group and also through our social media. And if there is a possibility of collaboration to share the report, I think this is also something that we look forward in the futures. And I would like to also add something, if that's okay, Elena, about the solidarity. I think it's important also about mutual aid that we also bring the solidarity between across movements. Like a lot of discussion today, we bring also the intersection between indigeneity, climate change, and also disability. We also have to highlight also the importance of gender equality, climate change, and also disability to be also raised, and how we can work together between those funders that working on those different issues to work together, ensuring that disability issue also a part of their work also. And as grant making with participatory grant making, DRF also try to have been in reach out those marginalized and particularly those grassroots OPD. So I hope also that some funder that participate in this webinar also thinking to reach out those at the grassroots levels who are still lack of resources. As Maria also said that women with disability, for example, is the one that really the front line affected by climate change when accesses natural resources. So thinking in how that your organization as a funder, you can reach out those grassroots organization of person with disability and ensuring their voice is included in your decision making also. Thank you.
Dwi, thank you so much for that very eloquent response as well.
Elaine, I can't get my camera on, I'm so sorry, but I did just want to add something to that, if I may, very briefly.
Absolutely, please go ahead.
So Yasmin can chime in if she'd like, but what was behind the impetus for this report was there was a very influential report that changed the landscape really of climate philanthropy, I think called the Edge report some years ago. And that was what we were thinking of when we were thinking of this report, that we hope that it would actually have a similar impact for disabled people, but with not just climate funders, but starting with climate funders. I think something that Catherine also said earlier on, where Elaine also you said it's a sort of memorable sort of a phrase is, you know, just get started. And you know, in my own experience of leading inpatients wellbeing, which is a, you know, disability strand of the inpatients work, it is very, very difficult to get funding for disability causes. I know this, but I just take it as each conversation at a time. And if we can all of us on this call, share the report with just even one funder that we know, that's another way of getting the message out. So it's both us that have to sort of push the report forward, but also, you know, the funders on this call, if you could also reach out to the organisations that you haven't reached out yet to, and say, you know, you've attended this webinar and read the report, and that you too feel that these voices are critical, and just start the conversations. That would be brilliant. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah Bajaya. Absolutely, just get started. That is definitely a key takeaway. I think that most people on this call are going to be taking away, no matter what organisation or background they are coming from. Okay, so we have hit sort of 6 minutes past 3. I'm going to be taking 2 more audience questions, and then we're going to be coming around to our thank yous, closing remarks, and etc. So if you haven't had a chance to ask a question, or you have asked a question and no one has, we haven't been able to get to it today, don't worry, my colleagues are collating the questions as we speak, and you will receive a written response in due course. But now for our second to last audience question, I'm going to put this to you, Bon. Cecilia says, how can we better prepare as non-OPDs to effectively collaborate with OPDs?
Can you come back with the question?
Yep, I can repeat myself. So this question comes from audience member Cecilia. How can we better prepare as non-OPDs to effectively collaborate with OPDs?
Yeah, I think that's quite an interesting question. The first preparation I'll look at is our mindset. I think as organizations who are not working with people with disabilities, the thing is to look at our own attitudes, our own background, and our own biases as individuals. Well, that's what shapes how we see persons with disabilities. That's what shapes about fear and also brings in exclusion. So the only thing that you can do is one, to be very intentional to understand the specific needs of persons with disabilities. Be very intentional in your inclusion interventions, both at the programming level, budgeting level, implementation level. Just creating opportunities where people with disabilities will be present. But I also encourage you to start documenting the lived experiences of people with disabilities. Give them space to speak, document those experiences, and be able to share those experiences. But key is to open up our own hearts as individuals without disabilities and ensure that we are very intentional in respecting other people with different diversity.
Wonderful, thank you, Bon. I'm going to give all of my panelists a chance to come back with a response as well, if you have any insight on this particular subject. Okay, otherwise, oh, Sarah Bajaya, do you have something to share?
Yes, I think in the report, the OPDs and INGOs and funders all talked about how, and it speaks to this question actually, about feeling, what can you say, a lack of confidence, I suppose, is the way to phrase it, of approaching disabled OPDs, DDPOs, disabled people. And I think that's certainly a reflection in any survey research that is done, that non-disabled people do worry. You know, they're anxious about saying the wrong thing and that sort of thing. honestly, don't be. We're all exploring this journey together. There's no question of offending people. You know, if you feel you're saying the right thing, or you or the wrong thing, and you just ask. We're all, at the end of the day, we're all human beings, and you know, we're all trying our best. And so, you know, just be brave, enter these sort of spaces with us. We'll be brave and enter these spaces with you, and let's just solve some issues together. You know, I was just thinking in terms of, you know, the sort of divide in a way between disabled people and non-disabled. There are, as Yasmin said, 1.6 billion of us in the world, and in the UK itself, we are almost 24% of the population. That's almost a quarter of the population. So, and probably we all know disabled people that we didn't really know were disabled. So we're probably already having conversations. So, you know, all I would say is be brave and don't worry about offending. Just, you know, just ask. I think that's the best thing. Just ask. You know, as I said at the beginning, you know, I'm blind, motorized, wheelchair user. This was new to me. I acquired my impairments, as indeed most disabled people do. And you know, I don't find offence at all if people ask me things. I'm very happy to share, and the same with organisations. And we heard from Bon, and we heard from Maria, you know, the fantastic work that they're doing. There's many examples and case studies in the report. There's fantastic work going on. So yeah, we welcome conversations with you. That's really what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah Vijay. That was a really valuable contribution as well. Thank you to all of the panelists who have spoken so far, and all of the audience members who have posted a question. I'm going to give Maria a chance, if she is with us, to come in and wrap up her presentation. I realised that she didn't get the opportunity to finish. Otherwise, we will take one more audience question. Maria, are you with us? Okay, I believe Maria is still having some technical difficulties. Just give it another few seconds before we go to our final audience question. Okay, Sarah Vijaya, actually, I'm going to pose this audience question. Oh, Maria, you're here.
Yes, Elaine.
Hi, we're glad to have you back.
Yeah, I'm so sorry with this technical trouble.
It's absolutely fine. Just glad you could get back on. I wanted to give you the opportunity to wrap up your presentation. I realized you were cut off. So would you like to share sort of the summary or closing remarks to your presentation?
Yeah, if we look at the situation of indigenous women with disabilities, I think I agree with what Ibu Dwi said, that stigma and discrimination against indigenous persons with disabilities, especially women, it still very high, and they are also excluded, not involved in every decision-making processes in the village as indigenous people with disabilities. And I think really indigenous women with disabilities still need support to empowering themselves so they are able to participate meaningfully in the decision-making process. Most of indigenous women with disabilities are lack of education, lack of knowledge, and I think they really need support to empower themselves. Yes, thank you, Elaine.
No problem at all. Thank you. Thank you for all of my panelists today. Thank you for your expertise and your insight. I think it's been a wonderful discussion. Like I said, audience members, if you have a question or a comment that we did not get around to answering today, my colleague is collating them as we speak, and we can come back to you with a written response in due course. I would like to just share a final reminder. Alliance Magazine is offering a 20% discount code to all event attendees today. If you'd like to subscribe to Alliance Magazine, Alliance is a compendium of news, analysis and opinion on global philanthropy and social investment. The link is in the chat. I think someone is going to be reposting it shortly. Again, thank you to all of you. I hope you enjoyed this Alliance webinar in partnership with Impatience Earth, Disability Rights Fund and Impatience Wellbeing. I hope you get the chance to read the report as well. Please share it widely. It's truly a great and insightful read. To all of our audience members, have a wonderful rest of your day, wherever you are in the world. Thank you so much.